Yes, sir.
And Mr. Merson is the head of the Public Defender's Office, and he is going to represent you today and potentially in the future. You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The man on camera folds his arms, leans against the doorframe, and stares into the lens. His wife and 2 little girls are missing, he says. He just wants them home. He doesn't cry. He barely blinks. If you're out there, just come back, Christopher Watts tells the local news crew in August 2018. Behind him, the house is silent. His pregnant wife, Shanann, and their daughters, Bella and Celeste, are already dead. Their bodies lie hours away at an oil site owned by his employer. The man begging for their safe return is the one who put them there. To the outside world, Christopher Lee Watts is the quiet family man in the nice Colorado subdivision. Born in 1985 in North Carolina, he grows up reserved, sports-obsessed, mechanically inclined. Friends remember a soft-spoken guy who keeps his head down, not the type to start fights. Social media paints an even brighter picture. Shanann posting videos of gender reveals, family trips, and a husband who seems devoted to his daughters. But behind the curated images is something else: mounting debt, a failing marriage, and a man reinventing himself at the gym while secretly pursuing a new relationship. 1 pregnant wife, 2 small children, 1 affair, and a decision that would turn a private crisis into one of the most disturbing family murders in recent memory. Watts meets Shanann Razuchek in North Carolina. She's outgoing, driven, recovering from health struggles. They marry, move to Colorado, and build what looks like a picture-perfect life. But by 2015, money is collapsing beneath them. They file for bankruptcy with over $70,000 in credit card debt. Credit cards are maxed. Their mortgage payments loom large. Shanann's multi-level marketing work with Thrive demands constant posting and travel, putting additional strain on the marriage. Their social media presence, all smiles and success, masks growing financial pressure and emotional distance. Watts retreats into quiet routines, then into the gym. In 2018, he begins an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. He lies about his marital status, claims the relationship is essentially over, and throws himself into the fantasy of a new life. No debt, no drama, no responsibilities he doesn't choose. When Shanann becomes pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy she calls Nico, the gap between his fantasy and his reality widens. He tells her he wants a separation. He tells his mistress he's nearly divorced. In truth, he's doing neither. He's drifting toward a 3rd option, erasing the problem entirely. In the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Shanann returns from a work trip to Arizona, dropped off by a friend at 1:48 a.m. By morning, she and the children are gone. That's the story Watts will tell. In reality, investigators say he strangles her in their bedroom after yet another argument about the affair and their future. Their daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, are still alive in the house when he loads Shanann's body into his truck. He drives them all to a remote oil site where he works for Anadarko Petroleum. There, he kills his children one after another and disposes of their bodies in separate oil tanks, burying Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. It is not a sudden explosion in public, not a frantic, chaotic attack. It is a series of deliberate decisions taken over hours: kill, transport, conceal. Then he goes to work. He texts co-workers, he makes casual conversation, he pretends nothing has happened. The most horrifying element is not a single act of violence, it is the cold practicality of treating his wife and children as obstacles to be removed. When Shanann's friend, Nicole Atkinson, can't reach her that morning, she grows increasingly concerned. Shanann has missed a doctor's appointment. She isn't responding to texts, unusual for someone constantly on her phone. Nicole calls police. Body camera footage from that welfare check shows a house that feels off. Her purse is there, her phone is there, the kids' medications are there, her car is still in the garage, but she is not. Watts fidgets, talks too much, repeats that he just wants them back. A neighbor quietly pulls an officer aside and says something is wrong with him. He's not acting right, the neighbor insists. Surveillance footage from next door shows Watts backing his truck up to the garage in a way the neighbor has never seen before. When investigators ask Watts to take a polygraph test, he agrees. He fails spectacularly. His measured physiological responses spike when asked about his missing family. Confronted with the evidence, he first tries to blame Shanann, claiming she killed the girls and he killed her in rage. Eventually, he admits what he did. On August 15, 2018, he is arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and related offenses. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, Watts pleads guilty in November 2018 to all charges: 3 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with deceased bodies. In court, Shanann's father, Frank Rzucek, calls him a heartless monster and evil, but the family asks prosecutors not to pursue execution. The judge sentences him to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus additional years. This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime I have handled, the judge declares. Watts shows little emotion as the words are read. The man who once performed grief on television now stands silent while his real actions are finally described out loud. Today, Christopher Watts is housed at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin for his own safety, spending his days in protective custody. From behind bars, he has written letters about religious conversion, claiming forgiveness and transformation, but the reality is unchangeable. 4 lives ended for a fantasy of starting over. Author Sharon Cadle, who corresponded with Watts, revealed disturbing details about his crimes, including that Bella witnessed her mother's murder and pleaded for her own life, asking, "Daddy, no!" before he killed her. Documentaries, books, and long-form analysis continue to dissect his case as a blueprint of family annihilation in the age of social media, where curated images can hide fatal fractures. Was this jealousy? Of his wife's control over the family, of his mistress's imagined life without children, or a chilling emptiness disguised as crisis? The motive sits at a crossroads of entitlement, cowardice, and a refusal to accept any version of adulthood that involved losing face. Family annihilators like Watts often share a common trait: the belief that their families are extensions of themselves rather than autonomous beings. For Watts, it wasn't enough to leave. He had to eliminate, and if he was the quiet husband who killed in secret, our next killer marched her jealousy straight into the spotlight and tried to use the courtroom itself as a stage.
Ma'am, were you crying when you were shooting him?
I don't remember.
Were you crying when you were stabbing him?
In the Phoenix courtroom, a young woman sits in the witness box and looks at the jury. She has been on the stand for days, telling intimate stories about sex, religion, and violence. A reporter asks if she thinks any jury would actually convict her of murder. "No jury is going to convict me," Jodi Arias replies, "because I am innocent. You can mark my words on that. She is wrong." Jodi Arias presents herself as soft-spoken, artistic, spiritual. Born in 1980 in California, she drifts through jobs and relationships, searching for something bigger. When she meets motivational speaker and salesman Travis Alexander at a conference in 2006, she's instantly drawn to his charisma and his deep ties to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She converts to his faith. She remodels her identity around him. Publicly, they look like a passionate couple on the rise. Privately, their relationship is volatile. Long distance, sexually intense, on again, off again, and increasingly defined by Arias's fear of being replaced. What begins as infatuation evolves into monitoring, jealousy, and eventually a homicide that will be dissected live on television. Arias's childhood is described in later accounts as strict and sometimes tense, but there is no clear record of extreme violence in her early years. Her parents ran a restaurant in Eureka, California, where she worked as a waitress after dropping out of high school. What we do see are patterns of intense, all-consuming relationships. Friends describe her becoming whoever her current partner wanted her to be, changing her appearance, interests, and even religious beliefs to match. When she meets Alexander, he is already embedded in a tight-knit social, religious, and business network in Mesa, Arizona. Arias is an outsider willing to do anything to become an insider. She moves states to be nearer. She immerses herself in his beliefs, his friends, his world. But while he can compartmentalize, dating other women while keeping Arias as a sexual partner, she cannot. Friends recall her appearing unannounced, listening at doors, reading his emails. She allegedly slashes his tires, hacks accounts, and refuses to accept breakups as final. In one incident, she reportedly breaks into his Facebook account and forwards compromising messages between Alexander and another woman. The more he tries to pull back, the more desperate she becomes to control the narrative. On June 4th, 2008, Arias drives from California to Arizona in a rental car with her license plates flipped upside down. She arrives at Alexander's home in Mesa. Time-stamped photographs recovered later show them together that afternoon, posing in bed. More photos, taken in the shower, capture Alexander standing under the water, unaware that these images will be used as evidence in his murder trial. At some point after 5:30 p.m., everything shifts. Alexander is stabbed 27 times. His throat is cut from ear to ear, with a wound so deep it nearly decapitates him. He's shot in the head with a .25 caliber gun, the same caliber as a weapon stolen from Arias's grandparents' home a week earlier. Forensic analysis suggests he's attacked in the bathroom and hallway, fighting for his life as he crawls away. The level of violence goes beyond self-defense. It suggests rage, humiliation, and overkill. Arias attempts to clean the scene, tries to wipe blood, deletes photos, and puts the camera in the washing machine. Then she drives away, stopping in the desert to dispose of the gun. She calls Alexander's phone and leaves voicemails in the days that follow, expressing concern about not hearing from him. She tells friends she hasn't seen him in months. She even attends his memorial service, approaching his friends with condolences. When worried friends finally break into Alexander's home on June 9th, they find his body in the shower. Blood is everywhere. Police arrive to a chaotic scene. On the shelf is the digital camera Arias tried to destroy. A technician recovers the images. There she is, in real time, with the man who is now dead. There is even a blurred final image that appears to show his bleeding body on the floor. Phone records, gas receipts showing a carefully planned road trip, and hair and blood evidence tie Arias to the crime. Her palm print in blood is found on the wall. Police recover deleted photos showing her and Alexander on the day of the murder. She is arrested in July 2008 in California and extradited to Arizona. The trial begins in 2013 and quickly becomes a media spectacle, broadcast live on cable networks with play-by-play analysis. Arias now claims she killed Alexander in self-defense after years of emotional and physical abuse. She tells the jury that he was a secret abuser, using her sexually while preparing to marry someone respectable. She spends 18 days on the stand, answering every question in detail, sometimes arguing with the prosecutor, sometimes crying. Prosecutor Juan Martinez aggressively challenges her story, pointing out inconsistencies and highlighting her changing accounts, first claiming no knowledge, then blaming masked intruders, and finally admitting to the killing but claiming self-defense. The prosecution paints a different picture, a jealous, obsessive ex who couldn't tolerate being replaced and who planned a killing disguised as a road trip romance. The images from the camera, the sequence of injuries, and her tangled web of lies become the backbone of the state's case. One juror later describes being disturbed by Arias's lack of emotion when talking about the killing, saying, "It was like she was talking about the weather." The jury convicts her of first-degree murder. The penalty phase deadlocks on the death penalty, as does a second sentencing jury, and she is ultimately sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Today, Jodi Arias is housed at the Perryville Prison Complex in Arizona, painting, writing, and occasionally giving interviews through intermediaries. She maintains an online presence through supporters who sell her artwork and share her letters. Her case has been the subject of a Lifetime movie, countless documentaries, and academic analysis about media portrayals of female killers. The trial is still studied in law schools for its lessons on media management and the challenges of high-profile prosecutions. For many, she remains the quintessential fatal attraction. the ex who drove hundreds of miles, disguised her movements, and destroyed a man who dared to move on. Is Jodi Arias purely a monster, or is she a person who turned every insecurity into a weapon? The answer doesn't lessen her responsibility. It underlines a pattern, a belief that access to someone else's body, faith, and time is a right, not a privilege. When that access is threatened, jealousy becomes justification. Travis Alexander's family continues to cope with their loss while his killer achieves the notoriety she once craved. And if Arias is jealousy in the form of an ex-girlfriend, our next story asks what happens when the jealous spouse is the one who once promised, "Till death do us part."
Betty Broderick remembers the day, November 5th of last year, the day she said she finally had it.
And I was just standing in that kitchen saying,
The bedroom is quiet when the shots ring out. It is just before dawn on November 5th, 1989, in San Diego's upscale Hillcrest neighborhood. Inside the house, attorney Daniel Broderick and his new wife Linda lie in bed. His ex-wife Elizabeth Ann Betty Broderick has used a key to enter the home. She walks upstairs with a revolver. Moments later, Dan and Linda are fatally wounded. Years of bitter divorce proceedings, accusations, and humiliation end in exactly 30 seconds of gunfire. For decades, Betty Broderick is the archetype of the devoted wife. Born in 1947 in Brooklyn and raised in a strict Catholic family, she is taught that her purpose is clear: marry, support, raise children. She meets Dan at a college football game. He's ambitious, medical school, then law school, then the world. Betty works as a teacher, then in sales, then as a stay-at-home mother, doing whatever it takes to support his climb. They marry in 1969 and have 4 children together. They move to California, where Dan becomes a successful malpractice attorney, earning over $1 million annually. Their 4 children grow up in a world of country clubs and professional respectability. Betty's identity becomes wrapped in his success. She is Mrs. Daniel Broderick, wife of the prominent attorney. But the more his status rises, the more disposable she feels. In her mind, she invested everything in his success. When a younger woman enters the picture, she sees not just betrayal, but theft. By the early 1980s, Dan hires a bright, much younger receptionist, Linda Colquena. Rumors of an affair swirl. Betty confronts him. He denies it, then later admits he wants out. What follows is one of the most contentious divorces in California history, stretching from 1985 to 1989. Dan, now a wealthy lawyer with deep connections, has the resources and knowledge to fight. He uses his legal connections to gain primary custody of their children. He secures court orders limiting Betty's access to their marital home. The power imbalance is stark. He knows the judges, the system, the legal maneuvers. Betty feels increasingly cornered and humiliated. She leaves threatening messages on his answering machine, sometimes dozens in a single day. "I have no money, no job, no husband, no children, no house," she screams on one recording. She crashes his home, vandalizes property, and once drives a car into his front door. She is arrested more than once. Her behavior becomes increasingly erratic, but she insists she is reacting to years of gaslighting, infidelity, and financial abuse. Supporters see a woman pushed past her breaking point. Critics see someone who refuses to let go of a life that has moved on without her. On April 22, 1989, Dan marries Linda. They settle into the Hillcrest home that Betty considers hers. He has remarried, rebuilt, and rebranded. She feels erased. In the months that follow, she continues to leave hostile messages and mail insulting cards. Her sense of grievance intensifies. The early hours of November 5th, she drives to their home with a revolver and the key she obtained from one of her daughters. She enters quietly, walks up the stairs to the main bedroom, and fires 5 shots. Linda is killed almost instantly. Dan is fatally wounded, reportedly saying, "Okay, you got me," before dying. The children wake to the aftermath of their parents' war reaching its final, irreversible moment. Betty calls one of her daughters, saying she shot Daddy. She later turns herself into police. In statements and interviews, she frames the killings as the culmination of years of psychological torment, that she was pushed, cornered, replaced. I was a 40-year-old woman with 4 teenagers and no job skills, she later tells an interviewer. He took my home, my kids, my money, and my husband, and I was angry. Prosecutors see something different. Jealousy and entitlement hardened into homicidal rage. Her first trial in 1990 ends with a hung jury, split between murder and manslaughter. Jurors later explain they were divided on whether her actions constituted the heat of passion or premeditated murder. The second trial, in 1991, brings a conviction on 2 counts of second-degree murder. The judge sentences her to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus additional time for firearm use. On the stand and in later interviews, Betty insists she is not a danger to anyone else. She describes herself as an abused, discarded spouse who snapped. "I was never out to kill anyone," she claims. "I wanted him to listen to me. If I had wanted to kill him, I could have done it any time." Advocates for Dan and Linda point back to the months of threats, the decision to bring a gun, the act of firing into a bed where 2 unarmed people slept. Betty Broderick remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women. Parole boards in 2010, 2017, and 2023 have repeatedly denied her release, citing her continued minimization of responsibility and lack of insight into her actions. At her most recent hearing, the board noted her resistance to exploring the causative factors that led to this crime. Her story has become the basis for TV movies, books, and a recent dramatized series on Netflix called Dirty John, the Betty Broderick Story. Some viewers sympathize with the emotional devastation of being replaced. Others see a chilling warning about how grievance, when mixed with jealousy and a sense of ownership, can override any sense of proportion. Was Betty a victim of a powerful husband's cruelty, or was she a jealous killer who used her history as a shield? The truth is not a binary. Both can be true. A person can be mistreated and still choose to commit an unforgivable act. In the end, the law judged not her feelings, but her actions. Her case continues to spark debate about the line between emotional breakdown and criminal responsibility. And if Betty's rage played out across suburbia and the tabloids, the next jealous killer hid behind a Z badge and used the credibility of a police uniform as camouflage.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, guilty of the crime of murder of Sherry Rasmussen in violation of Penal Code.
In the windowless interview room inside Los Angeles Police Department headquarters, a veteran detective sits across from her colleagues. They talk about art theft, travel, her career. It sounds casual, until it doesn't. The questions slowly tighten around a decades-old murder. Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, now a respected LAPD detective, realizes too late that she is not part of an investigation. She is the investigation. Minutes later, she is under arrest for a killing committed 23 years earlier, one fueled, prosecutors say, by romantic jealousy. In the 1980s, Lazarus is a rising officer and former college athlete. Born in 1960, she grows up in a middle-class family in Southern California. She attends UCLA, where she plays on the women's basketball team. Disciplined, competitive, someone who hates to lose. She is smart, disciplined, and competitive. During college, she dates a fellow student, John Ruetten. Their relationship is serious, but not exclusive. They drift apart, but stay in contact. They continue to see each other occasionally, even after graduation. For Stephanie, the connection never fully ends. She joins the Los Angeles Police Department in 1983, beginning a career that would span more than 25 years. Even as she builds her professional life, she visits John, works out with him, keeps her presence in his orbit. When John meets Sherry Rasmussen, a young hospital nursing director, and decides to marry her in 1985, Lazarus does not take it quietly. There are reports of confrontations, including one where Lazarus allegedly tells Sherry she will always be with John physically and sexually. It is the language of possession, not closure. Sherry tells her family and co-workers about these uncomfortable encounters, saying she fears this police officer who cannot accept the marriage. On February 24th, 1986, police respond to the Van Nuys condo Sherry shares with John. He has come home to a nightmare. Sherry lies on the living room floor, brutally beaten and shot 3 times with a .38 caliber weapon, a common police service revolver. There is a bite mark on her forearm. The apartment is ransacked, a television set knocked over, signs of struggle everywhere. Detectives classify it as a botched burglary, possibly by 2 unknown men who had attempted other break-ins in the area. Sherry's parents are not convinced. They repeatedly tell police about Lazarus, about the confrontations, about their fear that this was personal. Nels Rasmussen, Sherry's father, later recalls telling detectives the person who did this was the ex-girlfriend of John, who is an LA police officer. At the time, those warnings go nowhere. The case goes cold. Meanwhile, Stephanie Lazarus moves up through LAPD. She works in various divisions, including the juvenile unit and commercial crimes. She marries another police officer, builds a solid reputation, and eventually ends up in an art theft unit, becoming one of the department's experts on art crime. She divorces, builds a long resume, gains the respect of colleagues. For more than 2 decades, she passes colleagues in hallways, investigates other people's crimes, and carries a gun and badge. The file on Sherry Rasmussen gathers dust until advances in DNA change the landscape. In the early 2000s, the Los Angeles Cold Case Unit re-examines old files. In 2005, forensic scientists extract DNA from the bite mark on Sherry's arm that had been swabbed and preserved. Testing now reveals the DNA belongs not to a man, but to a woman. This contradicts the original burglary theory. Detectives quietly pull old notes and discover Sherry's parents' repeated mentions of a female ex-girlfriend, an LAPD officer. They recognize the name. They realize their colleague could be a suspect. The investigation becomes extraordinarily sensitive. They must investigate one of their own without tipping her off. The investigation that follows is handled with extreme secrecy. A small team works the case, keeping it from most of the department. Detectives follow Lazarus to a shopping mall food court and collect a discarded straw she used. The DNA sample from this straw is tested against the bite mark evidence. The match is conclusive. Her service weapon model is consistent with the murder weapon. The staged burglary, the missing items, the positioning of the body, everything looks less like a random crime and more like a jealous ex-lover, eliminating a rival and using knowledge of police work to disguise it. In June 2009, Lazarus is invited to that casual interview at headquarters, supposedly to help with an art theft case. Once the questions tighten and the confrontation begins, she claims she barely knew Sherry, that any past issues were minor. "This is insane," she tells her colleagues. When detectives lay out the DNA evidence, she is arrested on the spot. A fellow officer leads her away in handcuffs. For many in the department, it is like a trap door opening beneath the profession itself. How could someone wear the badge for decades while hiding such a crime? Her 2012 trial paints 2 radically different pictures. The defense suggests gaps in the original investigation, alternative suspects, and possible contamination of the DNA evidence. The prosecution lays out a story of an obsessed ex-girlfriend who harassed her former partner's new wife, then killed her in a burst of rage, staging the scene to look like a burglary. Jurors hear about the bite mark, about Sherry's complaints of being followed and confronted, about the ignored warnings. They also see the DNA charts showing a 1 in 402 quadrillion chance that the DNA belonged to someone other than Lazarus. In the end, they convict Lazarus of first-degree murder. Judge Robert Perry sentences her to 27 years to life in prison, saying the evidence showed planning and calculation. Today, Stephanie Lazarus serves her term at the California Institution for Women in Corona. Parole boards and courts have repeatedly upheld the conviction and declined early release appeals. As of 2025, she continues to maintain her innocence through appeals. For Sherry's family, the case is not just about one woman's jealousy. It is about an entire system's failure to listen when victims and families say, Look closer at the person you trust. What does it mean when the jealous ex isn't a fringe figure, but the very person the public turns to for protection? The LAPD has since strengthened protocols for handling cases involving officers as potential suspects, but the Lazarus case remains a stain on the department's history. In Lazarus's case, jealousy wasn't just an emotion, it was shielded by institutional power. Our next story leaves the precinct and moves to a hotel parking lot in Texas, where another jealous spouse weaponized something else, a 2-ton luxury car.
Pitched his arguments along 2 parallel tracks. Try to win a not guilty verdict, but if that failed, also try to build sympathy for Clara Harris.
The security camera doesn't blink. It records a Mercedes-Benz circling a hotel parking lot in Nassau Bay, Texas, on a humid July night in 2002. A man is running. A woman is behind the wheel. Witnesses will later say she drives over him once, then again. The woman is Dr. Clara Luz Harris. The man is her husband, orthodontist David Harris. Minutes earlier, she confronted him and his mistress inside the hotel. Years of suspicion and jealousy have just culminated in a crime the media will call the Mercedes murder. Clara Harris is a Colombian immigrant who builds a successful life in the United States. Born in Colombia, she moves to America with dreams of professional success. She studies diligently, becoming a dentist and establishing her practice in the Houston suburbs. She becomes a dentist, marries orthodontist David, and together they construct a profitable dental and orthodontic business in the Houston area. They live in a large suburban home worth over $500,000. They drive luxury cars. Their twin boys attend private schools. To outsiders, they are the image of professional success and stability. Then in 2001, Clara discovers that David is having an affair with Gail Bridges, a receptionist from their practice. The revelation shatters her carefully constructed world. Devastated, she confronts him. He promises to end it. He doesn't. Clara's fear of losing her marriage turns into hypervigilance. She begins monitoring David's movements, checking his phone, and questioning his whereabouts. Her professional confidence doesn't extend to her marriage, where insecurity grows. She hires Blue Moon Investigations, a private detective agency, to follow David and confirm whether the affair has really ended. The investigators track his movements, documenting meetings with Gail. As the evidence piles up, Clara's internal world collapses. She is not just facing betrayal, she is facing the potential destruction of the identity she has built. Faithful wife, successful partner, mother, respected professional. Jealousy here is not a passing sting. It becomes an obsession, fed by daily reports of where he goes, who he meets, and how he lies. On July 24, 2002, the investigators inform Clara that David and Gail have checked into the Nassau Bay Hilton, just miles from the Harris home. Clara doesn't go alone. She brings David's teenage daughter from a previous relationship, Lindsay. Together, they drive to the hotel. Surveillance video captures Clara bursting into the lobby, confronting David and Gail in front of guests and staff. There is shouting, slapping, a scene so dramatic that hotel employees intervene. The confrontation spills into the parking lot. What happens next lasts seconds, but rewrites everyone's life. Out in the open air, with David and Gail walking toward Gail's car, Clara gets back into her Mercedes. Accounts from witnesses and video evidence show the car accelerating toward David. He goes down. Instead of stopping, the vehicle circles and runs over him again. His daughter is in the passenger seat, screaming, "No, Mom! No, Mom!" Lindsay cries as the car strikes her father. The private investigators, still on the scene, capture part of the incident on video. The man she loves and hates in that moment dies under the wheels of his wife's rage. This is not a quiet crime behind closed doors. It is jealousy made public, metallic, and brutally final. Police arrive quickly. Witnesses describe what they saw. The private investigators, who were filming from another car, hand over the tape. There is no mystery about who killed David Harris. The question becomes, what exactly was in Clara's mind when she pressed her foot on the accelerator? Did she intend to kill, or was this a moment of uncontrollable rage? At trial in 2003, prosecutors argue she intentionally murdered her husband in a jealous fury. They play the surveillance video showing the Mercedes circling back over David's body. They call witnesses who heard Clara threaten to kill him. The defense, led by renowned attorney George Parnham, argues sudden passion, that her actions, while deadly, were provoked by an immediate, overwhelming emotional storm and should reduce her culpability. They portray Clara as a loving wife pushed beyond her limits by repeated betrayal. Testimony from her stepdaughter Lindsay is harrowing. She describes screaming as her stepmother drove over her father. On the stand, Clara collapses in tears, apologizing to her children and insisting she never planned to kill him. "I just wanted to hurt him like he hurt me," she testifies. The jury ultimately convicts her of murder, but finds that she acted under sudden passion, reducing the sentencing range from up to life to a maximum of 20 years. She receives 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Clara Harris serves about 15 years before being granted parole in 2018. She must report to a parole officer monthly and cannot contact David's family or Gail Bridges. By then, the public's fascination with the case has produced a TV movie starring Elizabeth Pena, numerous documentaries, and long-form journalism exploring what happens when educated, professional adults act in ways that seem, from the outside, almost unthinkable. There is no question that David's affair was a betrayal. There is also no question that his wife turned that betrayal into homicide. How thin is the line between a fantasy of revenge and the reality of carrying it out? Most people who imagine confronting an unfaithful partner never drive the car. Clara Harris did. Her case reminds us that jealousy does not require a criminal background or a history of violence. It requires only a belief that one's pain justifies anything. The next case shows that when you add a love triangle, a long-distance fiancé, and a crowded metropolis, jealousy can fuel not just a killing, but a dismemberment and an attempted erasure.
Of culpable homicide, and Maria Sosairaj has been held guilty for destruction of evidence in the murder of Neeraj Grover. This happened in 2008.
Mumbai, 2008. A young television executive named Neeraj Grover helps an aspiring actress, Maria Monica Sosairaj, navigate the city's entertainment industry. He helps her find an apartment in Malad, visits often, and becomes part of her new life. Hundreds of kilometers away, Maria's fiancé, naval officer Emile Jerome Matthew, grows increasingly suspicious. On a late-night call, he hears a man's voice in her flat. Jealousy, distance, and insecurity fuse into a single decision. He boards a flight to Mumbai. Maria is an aspiring actress from Karnataka, eager to break into television. Born in a small town in southern India, she moves to Mumbai, India's entertainment capital, with dreams of stardom. The city is competitive, expensive, and overwhelming for newcomers. Neeraj, working with a production company called Synergy Ad Labs, has contacts. Their relationship is a subject of debate. Friends describe it as close, possibly romantic. Maria insists later that Neeraj was simply a friend and mentor who helped her find work and housing in the intimidating city. What is not in dispute is that her relationship with Emile is strained by her new life. He disapproves of her social circles, of male colleagues visiting her apartment, of the freedom that comes with a career in entertainment. From his naval base in Kochi, Kerala, he monitors her by phone, growing increasingly possessive as her independence grows. On the night of May 6, 2008, Emile calls Maria and hears a male voice in the background. It is Neeraj, who has come to her apartment with news of a potential role. Emile flies into a jealous rage. He flies from Kochi to Mumbai after hearing Neeraj's voice during a phone call, taking leave from his naval duties without proper authorization. Early on May 7th, he arrives at Maria's apartment in Dheeraj Solitaire building and finds Neeraj there. According to court documents, Neeraj has spent the night. What happens next is pieced together from confessions and forensic evidence. There is a confrontation, an argument, a fight. In the bedroom, Emile grabs a knife from the kitchen and stabs Neeraj repeatedly, inflicting at least 12 wounds and killing him. What began as suspicion turns into homicide in a matter of minutes, but the most disturbing part of the story is what follows. Faced with a body in the apartment, Emil and Maria decide not to call police. Instead, they embark on a plan to erase Neeraj physically. Over the course of hours, they purchase supplies, knives, curtains, plastic bags, cleaning materials from local shops. Emil dismembers Neeraj's body in the bathroom, cutting it into more than 30 pieces. Maria reportedly helps clean the apartment, scrubbing blood from the floors and walls. The remains are placed in bags and later transported to a forested area near Manor, outside Mumbai, where they are doused in gasoline and set on fire. The intention is clear. No body, no crime. It is an attempt to turn a jealous outburst into a disappearance. Neeraj's sudden absence does not go unnoticed. When he fails to show up for work and cannot be reached, his friends and family raise alarms. His parents file a missing person report. Investigators trace his last known movements and contacts, leading them to Maria. Her statements are inconsistent. Forensic teams discover bloodstains and signs of cleanup in the apartment despite the couple's efforts. DNA tests confirm the blood belongs to Neeraj. Confronted with the evidence, Maria gives a statement outlining the killing and the disposal of the body, placing primary blame on Emil while acknowledging her role in destroying evidence. Emil is arrested while attempting to return to his naval base. In 2011, a Mumbai court delivers a verdict that shocks the public. It convicts Emil Jerome Matthew not of murder but of culpable homicide not amounting to murder, along with destruction of evidence. He receives a 10-year sentence. Maria is convicted only for destruction of evidence and sentenced to 3 years, effectively time served, as she had already spent 3 years in jail during the trial. The relatively light sentences spark public outrage and protests. How can such a brutal killing and dismemberment be treated as something less than murder? The answer lies partly in legal interpretation of sudden provocation and partly in how jealousy and honor are weighed in courtrooms. The judge accepts the argument that Emil acted in the heat of passion upon finding another man in his fiancée's apartment. Both Emil and Maria have since walked free. Emil was released in 2018 after serving his sentence, and Maria returned to Karnataka, maintaining a low profile. The case, however, continues to live on in Indian true crime coverage and in a fictionalized film, Not a Love Story, directed by Ram Gopal Varma and loosely inspired by the events. For Neeraj's family, no length of sentence could equal what was taken from them. His father told reporters after the verdict, "We have lost our son. The judgment has not given us justice." For the public, the story is a cautionary tale about how quickly suspicion can become violence and how the law sometimes views jealousy as mitigation rather than aggravation. When jealousy, ego, and fear of humiliation collide in a cramped apartment, the result can be catastrophic. In this case, the victim was a man in his 20s trying to build a career. His body was cut apart and burned to protect his killers. The legal system treated the crime as a momentary lapse rather than a deliberate murder followed by calculated disposal. In the next, jealousy reaches across an ocean and more than a century into the life of a national artist whose legacy is forever stained by the blood of his own family. He is celebrated as one of the great painters of the Philippines, a national figure whose canvases hang in museums and whose name appears in textbooks. But in Paris in 1892, Juan Luna y Novicio is not remembered for his art. He is remembered for the gunshots that kill his wife and mother-in-law in a small apartment, an act that will later be softened in court and in history as a crime of passion. Luna is born in 1857 in Ilocos Norte into a family that values education and achievement. His parents, modest but respected members of their community, encourage his artistic talents from an early age. He studies in Manila at the Academia de Dibujo y Pintura and later travels to Europe on a scholarship, where his talent as a painter earns him prizes and acclaim. In 1884, his masterpiece, Spoliarium, a massive canvas depicting dead gladiators, wins the gold medal at the Madrid Exposition of Fine Arts, bringing international recognition. His works depicting historical and allegorical scenes win medals at prestigious exhibitions. To Filipino nationalists and expatriates in Europe, he is proof that their people can compete with the best the West has to offer. Alongside his friend José Rizal, he becomes a symbol of Filipino excellence abroad. But away from the galleries, Luna's private life is troubled. He marries Maria de la Paz Pardo de Tavera, a woman from a prominent Filipino-Spanish family living in Europe. Their union brings together two influential clans, but it also brings Luna's temper, jealousy, and insecurities into the confines of a marriage. Accounts from the period describe quarrels, accusations, and episodes of domestic violence that escalate over time. Letters and journals from friends mention Luna's artistic temperament turning dark in private. He becomes increasingly suspicious that Paz is unfaithful, seeing betrayal not just in her actions, but in letters, friendships, and family dynamics. He resents the influence of her relatives, particularly her mother, Juliana Goricho. In his mind, they are turning Paz against him, undermining his authority as a husband. Friends later testify to his growing paranoia about his wife's activities and his belief that her family looked down on him despite his success. Over time, normal marital disagreements harden into something more dangerous, a worldview in which violent reclamation of honor seems not only possible, but acceptable. On September 22, 1892, that worldview becomes reality. In their Paris apartment on 26 Boulevard Pereire, Luna confronts Paz, Juliana, and other family members. The exact words spoken that day are lost to history, but witnesses later describe a heated argument about Paz's desire to separate from Luna and return to her family. The exact words spoken that day are lost to history, but the outcome is clear. Luna draws a revolver and fires. Paz is mortally wounded with a bullet to the neck. Juliana is killed instantly. Reports mention that he also fires at his brother-in-law, Felix Pardo de Tavera, who escapes with injuries. Their young son, Andres, is present in the home, witnessing the violence. In an instant, the celebrated artist becomes a killer, and the domestic sphere that was supposed to be private becomes a crime scene that will be discussed across continents. French authorities arrest Luna and charge him with murder. The case attracts enormous attention in France, Spain, and the Philippines. His defense leans heavily on the era's concept of crime of passion, the idea that a husband, upon discovering or believing in his wife's infidelity, could temporarily lose his reason. His lawyers argue that Luna acted in a moment of temporary insanity, triggered by jealousy and wounded honor. Courts in Europe at the time often treated such cases with surprising leniency, especially when the accused was a man of status. Newspapers portray Luna not as a cold-blooded murderer, but as a jealous husband driven temporarily mad by betrayal. The cultural context of the time, where male honor was deeply tied to female fidelity, works in his favor. In 1893, after 8 months of detention, a French court acquits Luna, accepting the narrative of passion and momentary insanity. The verdict reflects the era's legal approach to crimes of passion, which were seen less as murder and more as extreme but understandable reactions to personal humiliation. He spends some time in detention but avoids a long prison term. Afterward, he returns to his circles in Europe and later in Asia, continuing to work and to engage in political and intellectual life. In the Philippines and in diaspora communities, his crime recedes into a footnote, overshadowed by his contributions to art and nationalism. He continues painting, eventually returning to Manila, where he is commissioned for government works until his death from heart failure in 1899. Modern writers and historians have begun to revisit this sanitized version, pointing out the stark reality. A man shot his wife and her mother to death. Jealousy and suspected infidelity were used not as aggravating factors, but as excuses. Contemporary Filipino scholars, like Ambeth Ocampo, have called for a more honest reckoning with Luna's crime, arguing that artistic genius should not obscure violent criminality. The case forces uncomfortable questions about whose jealousy is forgiven and whose violence is minimized when the perpetrator is talented, male, and politically useful. can we separate the genius of the painter from the brutality of the man? For some, Luna remains a hero with a tragic flaw. For others, he is a symbol of how patriarchy and prestige can shield jealous violence from full accountability. What is undeniable is that 2 women died and that the person who killed them walked free, continuing his career and maintaining his status. Luna's case shows how time, talent, and gender have historically influenced who pays for crimes of jealousy and who is forgiven. In our next stories, there is no such leniency. The jealous killers are not national icons. They are teenagers, husbands, and ex-partners whose names become warnings rather than symbols of pride.
It was on the morning of June 7th that officers responded to a hotel room on Mason Drive where Martin was found dead. A judge did set a bond for Linkus at $100.
The photos show a smiling 18-year-old in a graduation cap and gown, arms wrapped around friends, the future wide open. Weeks later, those same friends are walking behind her coffin. In June 2023, Natalie Martin travels from Ohio to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, on a graduation trip with classmates. Among them is her ex-boyfriend, 20-year-old Blake Allen Linkus. They have recently broken up. According to prosecutors, his jealousy over her texting another boy has been simmering for weeks. Linkus and Martin grow up in the tight social circles of small-town life in Wheelersburg, Ohio. Both attend the same high school, where they begin dating in their sophomore year. Their relationship is typical of many teen romances: intense, all-consuming, and freighted with expectations that feel absolute at that age. Friends and family later describe Blake as controlling and possessive, monitoring Natalie's social media accounts and becoming angry when she spent time with male friends. He frequently checks her phone messages and demands to know her whereabouts. Friends report seeing him grab her arm during arguments or text her constantly when they were apart. He allegedly tells her repeatedly that, "If I can't have you, no one will," words that would later haunt everyone who heard them. To some, this is brushed off as ordinary young jealousy. To prosecutors, it becomes an early warning sign of something darker forming beneath the surface of typical teenage intensity. By the time of the trip, the relationship is officially over. Natalie had broken up with Blake about 2 weeks before graduation, telling friends she wanted to start college without the stress of his jealousy. Nevertheless, Natalie goes on the planned trip anyway, hoping to enjoy the beach and concerts with friends. Blake goes too, having already paid for his portion. The group of recently graduated teenagers stays in a rented condo near the popular South Carolina beach destination. The group attends a concert at the House of Blues, posts photos, and tries to savor the last summer before adult life begins. But in the background, a familiar pattern plays out: arguments, accusations, conflict over who texts whom. Blake becomes increasingly agitated when he sees Natalie texting a boy from back home. The details of that night are reconstructed later from statements and evidence, but the broad outline is painfully clear. At some point after the concert, in a rented condo, Linkus and Natalie are alone while other friends are still out. They argue again. According to what Linkus later tells police, she admits to being interested in someone else. His fear of losing control, of being replaced, of seeing her move on, spikes. There is no weapon brought in from outside, no elaborate plan, no strangers involved. He uses his hands, he strangles her. Medical evidence would later show she fought hard, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms. The same hands that held her in photos now end her. Life in a quiet room, hours after she danced with friends. Afterward, Linkus calls his father. He sends messages admitting what he has done. When friends return to the condo, he is still there with Natalie's body. They call 911. When police arrive, they find Natalie's body and a distraught young man who can no longer undo what happened. Officers note his knuckles are bruised and there are scratch marks on his arms. The case does not involve a lengthy whodunit. It is about why and about whether jealousy, youth, or emotional turmoil can ever explain killing someone you supposedly loved. In 2025, Linkus pleads guilty to murder. He accepts a plea agreement rather than face trial, where prosecutors were prepared to seek the maximum penalty. At sentencing, prosecutors describe him as controlling, insecure, and jealous, emphasizing that Natalie had expressed concerns about his behavior before the trip. Text messages recovered from her phone show she had told friends she was scared of his temper. Her family speaks through tears about a daughter who loved music, animals, and her friends, whose life was compressed into 18 years because someone could not bear to let her walk away. Her mother tells the court, she was just starting her life. She had been accepted to college. She wanted to become a veterinarian. All of that was taken because he couldn't accept that she had the right to choose her own path. The judge imposes a 45-year sentence without parole. Linkus will be a much older man, if alive, when he is eligible for release. Was this a monster or an immature young man who made an irreversible choice in a moment of rage? The label doesn't change the outcome. Natalie is dead. Her dreams, college, career, relationships with people who would treat her better are gone. What remains is a lesson often ignored. Controlling, jealous behavior in young relationships is not cute or normal. It is a risk factor that should never be dismissed. The red flags that friends and family saw, the possessiveness, the monitoring, the anger when Natalie exercised independence were predictors of potential violence. In the next case, that risk doesn't play out in a private condo. It explodes on a public street in broad daylight with a baby carriage inches away. Bradford, England, April 6, 2024. It is the middle of the day. 27-year-old Kulsuma Akhtar is pushing her baby in a pram down a busy street. She has done what professionals tell domestic abuse victims to do. She has left her husband, reported him, and moved into a women's refuge. Her husband, Habiba Masum, is out on bail for a previous knife attack. He cannot accept that she has left. He is obsessed with who she talks to, where she goes, how she lives without him. As passers-by watch in horror, he approaches and stabs her more than 20 times. Masum's relationship with Kulsuma is marked by control from the start. Born in Bangladesh, he comes to the UK and marries Kulsuma, who is also of Bangladeshi heritage but raised in England. Friends and police records later describe a pattern of possessiveness, threats, and physical assaults. When she tries to assert independence, his jealousy intensifies. He checks her phone, monitors her movements, and allegedly threatens to kill her if she leaves. Court records show she had reported him to police in January 2024 after he held a knife to her throat. He was arrested and released on bail with conditions to stay away from her. Eventually, she does leave. She seeks safety in a refuge with their child, trying to rebuild a life where she can walk outside without fear. Masum will not allow it. In the days and weeks before the attack, he stalks the area around the refuge, watches her routines, and uses technology to track her. This is not a sudden argument in a shared home. It is a hunt. On April 6th, he finds his moment. As she walks with the pram on Westgate in the centre of Bradford, he moves in. The attack is frenzied and deliberate. He stabs her repeatedly in the neck and chest while bystanders scream. A shopkeeper attempts to intervene, but is threatened. Witnesses later describe him as calm when he walks away, discarding the knife as Kulsuma lies dying on the pavement, her baby still in the stroller. Emergency services arrive quickly, but the injuries are too severe. She is pronounced dead at the scene, her infant unharmed but now motherless. The killing triggers a massive manhunt. CCTV footage and eyewitness descriptions flood the news. Police warn the public that Masum is dangerous and should not be approached. For 3 days, he evades capture. Police eventually arrest Masum in another part of the country days later, hiding in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire. In custody, he remains largely silent about his motives. In court, prosecutors lay out his history of abuse, his jealous obsession, and the steps he took to track and corner his wife. They argued this was a premeditated execution, not a loss of control. The judge agrees, calling him a violent, jealous, and controlling man who hunted down a woman who did everything she could to escape him. In November 2024, Masum is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 38 years before he can apply for parole. The judge describes the murder as an act of cruel retribution for Kulsuma's attempts to live independently. The public reacts with a mixture of grief and anger. Domestic violence advocates point to Kulsuma's case as an example of how existing protective measures often fail women. Despite having reported previous violence, having moved to a refuge, and Marson being on bail, she was still vulnerable. Kulsuma's death becomes a rallying point for advocates who point out that restraining orders, bail conditions, and refuges are not enough when systems do not fully grasp how determined some abusers are. The case prompts calls for electronic monitoring of domestic abusers and better coordination between agencies. Jealousy, in this context, is not a fleeting emotion. It is an ideology, the belief that a wife is property. When that belief is threatened by independence, some men would rather see their partner dead than free. The cases we have seen so far involve individuals, husbands, exes, lovers, who turn jealousy into murder. Most act alone, focusing their rage on a specific target. Our final story widens the lens to a man whose jealousy is amplified by misogyny and weapons training, leading to one of the most shocking family murders in recent British history.
She sent you that text message at the end of June. You began to plan her murder. Yes?
In July 2024, British sports broadcaster John Hunt is at work when police contact him with news no parent should hear. There has been an attack at his family home in Bushey, Hertfordshire. His wife Carol and his daughters Louise and Hannah are dead. The man responsible is someone they know, 26-year-old Kyle Marcus Clifford, Louise's ex-boyfriend, a former soldier described by a judge as a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt. Clifford's background includes service in the British Army. Though publicly available information about his early life is limited, he serves briefly before receiving a discharge. Records indicate he meets Louise Hunt in 2022 through mutual friends, and they begin a relationship that lasts approximately 18 months. What emerges clearly in sentencing remarks and media coverage is his pattern of controlling, angry behavior in his relationship with Louise. He monitors her social media, questions her friendships, and becomes increasingly possessive. As with many abusive dynamics, the red flags, jealousy, possessiveness, rage when boundaries are set, may have been minimized or misinterpreted as intensity rather than danger. When Louise decides to end the relationship in early 2024, Clifford does not accept it. He sends hundreds of messages alternating between threats, pleas for reconciliation, and declarations of love. He stews in humiliation and resentment, reportedly consuming misogynistic material online and nurturing a narrative in which he is the victim of female cruelty. On July 9, 2024, that narrative turns into a plan. Armed with a crossbow and knives, Clifford travels to the Hunt family home in Bushey. He purchases the crossbow legally online weeks earlier, exploiting a loophole in UK weapons regulations. Investigators later say he gains entry under false pretenses, exploiting the trust that still exists because of his past relationship with Louise. Inside, he launches a sustained attack. Carol, 61, is stabbed multiple times in the kitchen. Hannah, 28, and Louise, 25, are subjected to horrifying violence. Crossbow bolts and sharp force injuries inflict fatal damage. The details are too graphic to repeat in full. What matters is the pattern, a targeted extermination of the women closest to the ex-partner who dared to leave. After the attack, Clifford flees. He leaves a rambling note at the scene claiming the women had ruined him. A nationwide manhunt begins. Police warn the public not to approach him, describing him as armed and dangerous. He is eventually found in a cemetery in Enfield, London, with self-inflicted injuries. He had attempted suicide by crossbow, but survived. Paramedics treat him. He survives, but is left with life-changing paralysis. In custody, confronted with overwhelming forensic and digital evidence, he faces a choice: go to trial and force the families to endure every detail again, or plead. He chooses to plead guilty. In 2025, in a London Soffrey courtroom, Clifford admits to 3 counts of murder, 1 count of rape, and related weapons offenses. The rape charge relates to an attack on Louise before the murders. He refuses to attend his own sentencing, forcing the court and the victims' families to look at an empty dock while his acts are described. The judge describes the crime as an act of terrible, vengeful violence against innocent women whose only crime was that one of them exercised her right to end a relationship with you. The judge hands down a whole life order. Kyle Clifford will never be released. He will die in prison. For John Hunt and his surviving family members, there is no closure, only the knowledge that one man's jealousy and misogyny erased 3 generations of women. In a statement read to the court, Hunt describes his family as 3 kind, loving, talented women whose only mistake was to have their lives intersect with a monster. For the public, the case triggers debates about crossbow regulation, domestic abuse monitoring, and the influence of online hate communities on real-world violence. Parliament subsequently introduces legislation to regulate crossbow sales more strictly. At its core, however, the case is brutally simple. A man believed that his ex-girlfriend's decision to live without him was an intolerable insult. He chose to respond not with words, not with self-reflection, but with annihilation. Is Kyle Clifford an outlier, or is he the logical endpoint of a culture that sometimes frames jealousy as proof of love and female autonomy as provocation? His case shows the most extreme form of what we've seen throughout this exploration, the belief that romantic rejection justifies violence. His crime suggests that when entitlement is armed with weapons and ideology, the results are catastrophic. And what makes his case particularly horrifying is not just that he killed his ex-girlfriend, but that he extended his revenge to include her mother and sister, as if all women connected to the one who rejected him deserved elimination. Jealousy is often romanticized in pop culture, a sign that someone cares, an edgy kind of devotion. The 10 cases we have walked through tonight strip that illusion bare. Here, jealousy is not about love. It is about ownership. Across continents and centuries, the pattern is grimly consistent. The moment someone decides that their hurt feelings grant them the right to dictate whether another person lives or dies, jealousy stops being an emotion and becomes a weapon. Many of these victims tried to set boundaries. Some left. Some sought help. Some simply wanted a partner to grow up and accept change. The killers, in different ways, all reached the same conclusion. If I can't have you, no one will. This phrase, repeated across case files and court transcripts, is perhaps the clearest distillation of jealousy as ownership rather than love. Jealousy does not excuse violence. It exposes it. It reveals who sees partners as equals and who sees them as possessions. Each of these killers had moments, hours, days, sometimes years, when different choices were possible. They could have walked away. They could have sought help. They could have accepted rejection as painful but survivable. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which of these killers do you think was the most disturbing? Share your thoughts in the comments below.